Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Dave Anderson with the Child Mind Institute. September is Suicide Prevention Month, and I'm proud to be here today with my colleague, Dr. Jill Emanuele, a senior clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute who specializes in mood disorders and leads clinical training for our organization. Also joining us is filmmaker and star of the film, Nadine Croker. Nadine's latest film is called Continue. It's based in part on her personal experience of surviving a suicide attempt at age 23. Please note, for anybody who's watching or listening, this conversation will discuss a sensitive topic of suicide. For help and resources, we'll include this also at the end. Please visit childmind.org. And if you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide, call or text 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or visit your nearest emergency room. So, Dr. Emanuele, Nadine, we really appreciate you being here. Just to start us off, Nadine, both Jill and I have had the privilege of seeing the film. You wrote, directed, and star in Continue. Powerful look at the life of a young woman named Dean who's struggling with depression, and obviously the film begins with kind of a look at a suicide attempt. Tell us about her, your inspiration, how her experience parallels your own life.
Yeah, the film is written and based on true events from my life, which was, if I'm honest, numerous suicide attempts at the age of 23. It was one of the hardest years of my life. And many of the scenes from this film are conversations I had with family members, loved ones, friends along the way, trying to explain my depression, my suicidal ideation. And years later, I essentially started to try and look at a lot of those memories, look at those years, especially with some distance and feeling, more removed from that darkness. And as I did that, I started doing these scenes in an acting class. And every time when they would finish, people would come up to me afterwards and tell me their stories and tell me um, basically me too. And I started to realize that this could be a really incredible way to start a conversation on mental health and suicidal ideation. Because in my opinion, it's extremely isolating and you feel like you're completely alone, like no one else feels this way or is this way. Um, and so one of the most rewarding things about starting the process of this film and creating this film and even now till this day is hearing how many other people out there have some of these struggles, and it really is one of those moments of like we're all in this together. So a lot of things parallel my story and then a lot of things don't. There are some differences, and I did that so that people would um not do what I do. Like learn from what I should have done in certain instances, not maybe what I actually did and it took me years to do, or different things like that. But also for me, for the safety of knowing I was going to put on Dean's skin, and was going to live there. I didn't want it to be going into my own skin. I'm just not that way. I'm not method. So it was like creating enough differences that it was Dean's story, that it was stepping into Dean's life, Dean's struggles. And yes, while they were very parallel to my own and I knew that darkness very well, it definitely made me feel safer to not just be like, all right, you're going back to 23 and everything's identical and like you get to relive some of the worst or, best whatever moments of your life. So yeah, it has a lot of differences, but a lot of parallels, like even down to the way that like a lot of people ask, like, was that actually from you? It's like the even scenes you don't expect, love scenes, or like dialogue with friends or just all of it. I mean, they are very much grounded in real relationships and friendships and conversations I had.
I mean, look, you're previewing my first kind of drill down question, was just something I was incredible. I mean, as you say that these conversations were inspired by, real life moments that you've had, I found so many of them to be incredibly true to life for what we know of how these conversations happen. In particular, the conversation between you and the person who played your sister in the film. There is one particular conversation, Bennett, right? Was the sister's character's name? And, you're having this conversation. I mean, I was just wondering kind of some of where that came from, because obviously this is one family member in the film of your character and could also be representative of many conversations with family members. But, just can we talk a bit more about like that kind of interplay of a sister who deals with the same kinds of things and at the same time is so invested in staying alive with her sister through both of their journeys? It was I just found that incredible.
Oh, thank you. The funny thing is this is what I try and say a lot of times. Obviously, I'm very protective of the people who are in my life, my family, my friends.
Yeah,
So no one is quite based on exactly someone from my life because again, I feel as if um it's not my story to tell if they
yeah,
don't want their story told, right?
right,
So a lot of things are based on A, conversations I had, or B, on different aspects of myself at different times. Like I say, every character in this film is a little bit based on me. And like, which is, a weird thing to say, but it's different struggles we've had. So um there was definitely these moments in my life where our family was going through complete and utter hell and chaos. And I was also struggling the worst I've ever struggled. This is shortly after I ended up having my main attempt that this film is based on. And I just kept like the dialogue basically that came from that was being like, when you have to be the together one and you have to pretend that you're strong even though you're struggling, and it's like this thing, it's like we all in the family have the same genetics. Do you think
yeah,
all of us aren't struggling with some of the same things? And yet, because there's other people that are having really messy times, I wasn't allowed to have that, or I had to keep it all inside. I had to be the strong one, I had to be the one. And so a lot of that conversation came with different struggles that I felt like, especially in my hardest time, I couldn't really talk to anyone about because I needed to be buttoned up. Now, on the other side of it, then I was Dean, also unraveling completely behind closed doors,
yeah.
So some of that is based on me, some of it is based on my relationship with my sister, and, some conversations as I came out of my suicidal depression, or that really hard year of life, of
Yeah.
conversations we had of where, she didn't want to lose me and I didn't want to lose her either. She was going through a really hard time. So, again, it's inspired by conversations I've had in my
Right.
life, but then also aspects of myself because, I think we've all, when you really look at life, it's like we've all been each character of
Yeah.
this film. Maybe not every character of the film, but we've all had different parallel experiences or had to deal with different struggles.
Well, I thought it captured so well also what we see as dynamics within patient families a lot, where in a crisis situation, one member of the family becomes kind of the identified patient. But then as they engage in their journey to recovery, you see kind of this broadening back out of people realizing, well, wait a second, every family member has certain struggles. They share certain ones, they don't share others. But in that recovery process, part of it is kind of making room for the idea that everyone has those struggles versus saying like this is the only person in our family who is dealing with this. Now, turning for a second, Dr. Emanuele, I know that your practice includes many patients like Dean from, you know, early adolescence all the way through, later stages of adulthood. Uh, we can understand how, with a film like this and with the intensity of the content, we're not necessarily going to see many of our younger adolescent patients seeing this. But for the patients of ours that are kind of in that young adulthood age range, what do you think they'll take from seeing a story like this?
Well, first of all, it very much goes along with what we've been discussing already. There's a realism to this film that you don't see in a lot of movies that have this subject content in it. It's a lot sensationalized. It doesn't get into Most movies don't get into the depth that Continue gets into. And some of the examples you've already brought up are what I was thinking about. So, for example, the example with the sisters, they were discussing relapse. They were discussing fearing relapse and not knowing exactly, having to hide their suffering from others. There was the whole presentation of what it's like to actually have an attempt and the regret and the shame that comes from an attempt. And even just an attempt can be traumatizing. So I think one of the things that patients or people can see from this film is their own experience, and really being able to go, wow, there's other people that experience this just like me. I thought I was alone. You were saying this before, Nadine. And so it creates a community of people that can actually look at this and go, hey, there's others like me. I might be able to reach out and get some help because I see that they understand me. And when you feel, a lot of people who are depressed or contemplating suicide, isolation is one of the most difficult things that people experience. They really truly feel like they're alone despite being surrounded by a bunch of people. So I think that's some of the things that can come out of this film.
Yeah. And another thing I think we were really kind of, struck by was the way that the film kind of captures the ubiquity of how much families and networks of people are impacted and touched by any person within their village who's struggling with their mental health. Just with a film like this, and just a couple stats for our listeners, suicide is the third leading cause of death among adolescents and young adults 15 to 24. Teenagers and young adults who are at risk of suicide often hide their depression and anxiety from parents and friends. And Nadine, our next question to you is just sort of, we see how much part of the, Dean's journey in the film is about going from believing she can't let others in to see her suffering, or pushing away, an ex who might have otherwise wanted to care for her, to really kind of letting people in and claiming her life for herself. What's your journey in kind of overcoming that sort of belief system, or the belief that you can't talk about it? What do you hope people hear about in terms of how they break down stigma and talk about something like this?
I mean, I think that, again, our brain is not healthy in those times, right? And they start to tell us a lot of stories, and in a lot of those instances, we're kind of standing in our own way. I definitely, as I do better, I then backtrack and sabotage. As I start to open up, I then close it down. I didn't believe I deserved that love. So how could I let the Jackson character make me feel loved, or let him in that way, if I was ashamed of who I was, if I thought those different things, right? So I think a lot of it is realizing is that self-love, right? Is getting yourself healthy enough to see that the stories maybe our mind in that time are telling us aren't accurate. Like, I was convinced, and I know from a lot of people and other survivors I've spoke to, that I was a burden. So I was actually doing a favor. Like you said, like that patient,
I used a clinical term. It was identified patient. I shouldn't have gone that way, but yeah.
No,
yeah.
but I've heard that term before, and that's the truth. And as much as, like, maybe one person is the identified patient, the other hardest thing is that, like, there's so many members of my family that are also have these same things, but you can't make someone else realize, like, hey, who do you think I learned it from? Or who do you think, it's all of these different things. So again, it's like, we can't control other people. We can't control the world, which can be one of the hardest things. All we can kind of control is ourselves and what we do. And one of the hardest things was getting myself to realize that I deserve to be healthy, and that I could open up, and that I'm not a burden, and that, again, I'm not alone. There are other people that are going through this. And I think, it's a long journey, but the best thing I ever did was open up, because it brought me a whole new community. It's like the same about being sober. I'm 9 years sober. It's like the first time that you go to a meeting and you meet all of these other people, you realize, like, oh my God, I'm not unique. This is the best feeling in the entire world. Yeah. And then you hear people talk and you're like, yep, me. Yep, me. And it's like, it's the same for mental health, And I guess one of the things, like, all I wanted to do really in the grand scheme of things was to start a conversation, to get other people to leave the theater talking about their struggles, talking about someone they've lost, talking, even if they were mad at me at some of the twists and turns in the film, talk about it. Right. tell the world how mad you are. And, I have already witnessed it in such a huge way that, like, the people I've met after watching this film, like, I know some of the most personal things about them that maybe no one else in their life knows. Yeah. And, like, one of the number one things I say is, like, who else in your circle can you tell this to? Like, I want to see you, like, I hope that you continue to talk about this and to open up to the people in your life, And so, all I can say is that life got so much better when I did start to communicate about it, because you realize that you're not alone. Yeah. Like, there are so many other people who struggle. And, like, I am so curious too, statistically, what that looks like how many people, because when you spoke at Bentonville, one of the things that and they were reading that report, I looked over to my friend Olivia and I was like, oh my God, I qualify on, like, so many of the mental health, mental illness, like different, like I didn't even know addiction was a mental health like disorder or struggle. Like there's so many, so I'm so curious statistically is how many people are on the mental health spectrum, I like to call it, as opposed to aren't. Like I wonder if there's more of us that are qualifying somewhere in there than there isn't in the world.
Well, even so, to take that point and kind of broaden it, because that's a great question to pivot to Dr. Emanuele here, in the sense of like, it's not just suicide, it's not just depression. Dr. Emanuele, two kind of major questions, and kind of providing that context, because I think this is a really important message for anybody listening. What do we commonly want to communicate about the commonality of mental health and learning disorders? And then even then, like, I know one thing that we want to talk about related to the film too, is this is a female main character, where we are seeing statistics that are even more troubling across the country, in particular for female populations, struggling with these kinds of mental health concerns like depression and anxiety. So Dr. Emanuele, if you want to talk a little bit about, that kind of, at least what we see across the population in terms of how widespread this is.
Yeah. So, to Nadine's point, I really think that we have so many people who underreport mental health issues. And we are a little bit limited in the way we categorize mental health disorders. So we tend to say you have to have a number of symptoms in order to reach this criteria, and therefore you have a mental health disorder. Well, what about all the people that don't quite reach the criteria and don't qualify for the disorder, but they're struggling tremendously, right? So it's an imperfect system. We are also seeing in the past 10 years an increase in youth struggling, especially girls. And we're not 100% sure what's going on with that. We know that social media plays a role. We know that the world is kind of bonkers right now. And so that's certainly not helping in any kind of way. But we do see in general, and we've seen these trends for a really long time, that girls contemplate suicide much more than boys do. And they actually make attempts more than boys do. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that girls they're able to discuss their distress and maybe make more of an attempt to show it. But there's statistics that look at how pain tolerance and how men are potentially more tolerant of pain, although I don't fully know that that's true. I think it's dependent on how it's measured, but it's also
we also have great luck at avoiding certain life situations that are highly painful, such as childbirth. I'm just going to say, I'm not sure we've been tested. But anyway, keep going. Yeah.
I shook my head though too, because I'm like, my husband can't even get a cold, and I wonder. I had COVID. I had COVID. So I'm like,
I wonder about those statistics, to be honest with you.
We'll try to avoid the generalizations about males, but at the same time, I also am questioning them. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting statistic. But what we do know is that men complete more. They try more, and they do it more often with guns. Whereas women tend to use pills. Women tend to use, and we're seeing more women trying hanging. So we don't fully understand why our girls are distressed, but they are. And there's a lot of ways in which we can try to intervene to try and get them to open up, to figure out how to help them. And I think this film is a way to again say there is help out there, and there are people that understand you. Just like you were saying, Nadine, when you go to your meeting and you're like, oh my God, there's people who actually get this. So I think that makes a difference.
Well, the amount of messages, like just since the film came out, which was last Friday, like, and I think people are shocked that I write every single person back. Like sometimes it takes me a few days because I'm trying to get through all of them just so that they know what it means to me that they shared with me. But like the amount of people who reach out after watching this film, but primarily women, especially, to be like, dude, I've just never seen, like, it felt so parallel. And it was the first time I actually like felt like I could see my mental health or like my struggles shown. And it's like, this is exactly why I made the film this way. And I had to fight to not pull punches, to not make this glamorized version of mental health, because, that's something I've said forever, is like, no one sees themselves in the pretty girl that gets everything she wants and has like the easiest life after, like after the struggle. And it's, so many of the things that were really important to me, I'm now seeing in real time. I was so right for sticking to my guns, because that's what people are connecting to. But also what you touched on right there, like, I wrote down pressures for women, because you're like, we're not sure why women are struggling. I'm like, I feel like I understand it. Because the pressures, like, yes, social media on top of that, but we're also not supposed to age. We're not supposed to go back to work when we have kids. We are supposed to go back to work when we have kids. We're not supposed to take a break when we do this. So if we don't want kids, there's a problem. If we do want kids, there's a problem. Like, there's so much pressure, just period, on being a woman. And I don't want to like pretend that doesn't mean that all of us struggle, men and women alike. But I think all the time is I was already cutting and hurting myself from like seventh grade on. And I was always struggling. And like, my family had like the saying of like, oh, she's just so emotional. She's dramatic. That's our actress. Like all of that. And it's like, no, I was struggling from a really young age and no one was listening. And then I started to think I had to harm myself in order for people to care and all of these different things. And that is whatever year I was in those years. And the things that were just coming around were like MySpace, and there was this thing called Zynga, and I got a small taste of. Do you remember
throwbacks
that?
right here. I'm just like, okay,
throwbacks. I'm telling people I'm old. And it had just started, and I had girls in my high school, I assume it's girls, that made whole pages about how ugly I was, about how I was a slut, I was this, I was that, which again, all of these things weren't accurate. And it was how I actually even found out that I had an ear that was different than each other, because they had pictures, they had zoomed in on pictures from my MySpace to show that I had a deformed ear. And I was like, and I remember going to my mom and I was like, Mom, why didn't you tell me one of my ears was messed up? And she's like, what are you talking about? And it was just like, so this was a small taste in the MySpace Zynga, like those days of it growing. Imagine now the level of bullying, of not feeling enough. Because I, as a 35-year-old woman, still struggle with this. I see people's pictures and I'm like, oh, I don't look like that anymore. I see, it's just like, I can see the pressures and I can't even understand how heavy it must feel for our youth nowadays with the pressures of, because it's not just like one that exists, like Instagram, it's Snapchat, it's TikTok, it's there's so many avenues to feel not enough at this point.
And I think you highlight what's an interplay for almost any youth today, where social media is out there. It's not a genie that anybody's going to put back in the bottle. And while there is some research suggesting that for youth who are marginalized or don't feel accepted in their own communities, they can find communities of acceptance online. But you've highlighted two of the main lines of research that we want to draw people's attention to around body image and social media, and how you can put these things on steroids that are otherwise happening as pressures for young people. Not to mention the fact that, what online forums have allowed is for real world bullying that maybe a previous generation of kids was able to escape when they were at home, to now be magnified in online spaces and feel even more inescapable, leading to, one driver of why a youth's mental health may get worse. Another point that we focused on just in a moment with, or in the last few moments with your comments and Dr. Emanuele's comments, are just that, when you look at how youth are struggling early on, we know that 50% of mental health and learning disorders present by the time someone's 14. We know that 75% present by the time someone reaches young adulthood. We also know that mental health diagnoses, to reference something Dr. Emanuele said earlier on in this conversation, a mental health diagnosis isn't the only thing indicative of struggles. It's a continuum. Even for people who don't, meet criteria for a diagnosis, which is 1 in 5 individuals, there's another, 2 out of that 5 who may be struggling at some point, who may really need some level of support. So in thinking about this, and I know we referenced earlier that, as we see people struggling, females may be more likely to present as perhaps depressed or anxious. Just to capitalize on kind of the research on males may be more likely to cope through substances or alcohol. Even if they're not reporting depression or anxiety, we might theorize that could be kind of underlying. Dr. Emanuele, you referenced this earlier. Knowing all of that about how some of these struggles emerge so early, what can caregivers, adults in a youth's environment, anybody who has contact with youth, be on the lookout for somebody who's struggling, so that maybe we can get them help before this gets really a lot worse?
It's such an important question. And even Nadine, you were talking about this with your own experience, that people were struggling and you were just struggling. People were dismissing your experience, because a lot of the time adults don't want to see that kids are struggling. Or they have a hard time seeing it because they don't want their kids to be suffering. It's not a mean thing to do. It's not that they're trying to ignore it. It's just that it's very hard. So, but there's some very specific things that really can point to a kid is starting to struggle. So first of all, it's any kind of mental health struggle is a pattern. So it's not going to be like having the blues for like one day or a couple of days or isolating here and there. It's going to start looking like there's a specific change in the way a person is operating throughout the day. And you're going to see things like changes in sleep, changes in appetite, change in mood, or mood just being all over the place, more irritability, more sadness, withdrawal, feeling maybe expressions of guilt. Maybe even someone will be saying, I just don't feel like being here anymore. And a lot of the time people don't recognize that as there being something wrong. So we want it, but again, they're struggling in a way that they haven't been struggling. And the minute that you start to see that, it's not a question of like, should we take them to see somebody? It's like, go take them to see somebody, find someone as soon as possible. I remember I had one family who came in a long time ago who their child had some anxiety, but they weren't so worried about it. I was like, no, you did the right thing, because it's like, let's get on top of this right away so it doesn't become a bigger problem. Dave and I, unfortunately, we often see people where the problem has gotten tremendously worse. And it just because it wasn't recognized, or we're just hoping everything just gets better. Don't wait for things to get better. Get the help now.
And Dr. Emanuele, one quick follow-up question on that. Does talking make it worse?
Oh, talking doesn't make it. This is one of the biggest things about suicide. People are so scared to talk about suicide and self-harm because they're afraid that it's going to make the person do it. Absolutely not. There is no evidence behind that whatsoever. In fact, there's evidence to show that talking about it and opening up and expressing yourself can actually decrease the potential for any kind of attempt. So we want people to, I often will tell parents, ask your child, are you having any suicidal thoughts today? Are you feeling like dying? And at first, a lot of parents are like, what if it makes them feel that way? I'm like, no, they're already feeling that way. You're actually showing them that you understand by asking him that question. And they may not answer right away, but keep asking the question. So no, we absolutely want to be asking these questions and making it open. This is our experience. This is our human experience that we want to share. That's the biggest point.
And I think it's such an important point you're making, because even asking shows that there's an open line of communication that says, correct, I'm not scared by this subject. And even if you don't want to talk to me about it now because, oh my God, it caught you off guard, you can come back later. So I have a closing question for each of you. But before I get to the closing question, this is just morbid curiosity on Dr. Emanuele on my part. Nadine, talk to us about the therapist character. So well played by Emily Deschanel in the film. But just because we are interested in the portrayals of therapists, and just some of your impressions of how your journeys in therapy kind of reflected on this.
Yeah, I think I took it very seriously. I take everything
that much is apparent, as we're seeing in this discussion. You take even responding to each email from a fan seriously. But yes, the therapist role. Yeah.
Yes, that's so true. But I felt as if I had a responsibility to make sure that I was portraying a therapist correctly. So even basing it on some of the therapy sessions I've had, some of the things I wish I would have said, some of the things I wish they would have asked, like I can't say that all of my therapy went that way, because I can't say that when I was in that time, I was telling the truth, or that I didn't actually start therapy until after several attempts, and I didn't, I wrote down so many things that while you were speaking, because it actually made me start to get so emotional when you said just asking your child if they are depressed or suicidal, because that had never happened for me. And I think that if parents are listening, that is what we need more than anything. And you said, because we're just showing them that they can talk about it. And I said, judgment and acceptance. I said, it means that you don't judge me when you're asking me this, and that you are open enough to have this conversation, which means that that you aren't scared by me, or you know what I mean by those feelings. And so I think if I had had a more open place to have these conversations, it would have made a tremendous change for me. So yes, some of this is from my own life. Some of it is how I wish it would have gone if I had been more open and all of those things. But also another thing that was very important to me when making this film is when I wrote these scenes and I crafted them, I also had psychiatrists and therapists look at the scripts. I had numerous read the script before I ever made it to make sure that I was being responsible with everything that I said and did. And because there are other movies, shows that have taken this on and didn't do the responsible thing, in my opinion, and it had a huge backlashing of the opposite of what we want, which is more people taking their lives. So the number one thing I asked when going in is, am I portraying this therapist in the correct way? Is the dialogue, like, there's no boundaries being crossed? Because you even talked about that when we were on a panel together, is like a lot of, like, the therapist is always crossing boundaries and and like there maybe is some boundary crossing when she shows up to her house and they have that conversation at the house. But at that time it was like, I think it was also to try and save Dean's life in that way. So I kind of made an excuse for myself. I was like, wait, but sometimes you gotta know. But and so I think, and then also when I finished the film, I had numerous therapists and psychiatrists review it to make sure, again, nothing I'm saying can be misconstrued as the opposite of what I want, which the only thing I want is to help people to not end their life and to be here tomorrow and to continue. So yeah, so it took a lot of crafting and making sure that I was being responsible and making sure that I'm honoring therapists and the work that we do there, because it's work that saved my life. I mean, truthfully, like I now have an army for my mental health. I have a therapist that I see constantly. I have a life coach at the same time. I have a psychiatrist. I have a meditation coach. I have a nutritionist. I have a personal trainer. I have
you got
like, should I keep going?
Because
there's
going
more
right here. Yeah.
And that is the thing that I'll say the most. It doesn't happen overnight, but you start to get tools in your toolbox, and then you start to realize how much better you feel when you have it. And for me, I will try anything if it means that I'm here on this planet, that I am the mother that I need to be, the friend, the person that I need to be. And so for me, it's like, whatever that means. Then someone's like, well, what you should try now is like EMDR, or like, I'm like, great. Like typing and finding someone for that. And I just found a trauma therapist, like outside of my normal therapy, that I want to start really diving into my trauma. And like, so it's like, once you kind of get going on the healing journey, I find it to be, you just want more and more and more. You want to understand yourself. You want to understand those thoughts, because I wrote down when you were speaking too, I just don't want to be here. There is a distinguish for me. I used to be like, no, I'm not suicidal. I just don't want to be here. I'd like to sleep through a month. And for me, I'm like, and that's different, but it's like, but it's not. And either way, we should probably get help, because how quickly does I just don't want to be here for like a week or a month turn into I just don't want to be here at all anymore, and I want to die.
I just, as one, something to say before I get to the final questions, we were both watching, and I think as therapists, we watch for these therapist characters, and I think you really did capture a number of the aspects that you're talking about, of kind of Dean's initial resistance to even engaging with a therapist or telling the truth, all the way through to kind of some transformative moments that could get someone kind of like to make a jump in their healing. And, we can overlook the showing up at the therapist's house late at night, merely because I also look at that conversation, and that conversation could have happened any time of day, and it could have happened in the therapist's office. It's just that at that particular moment, there was a real danger of relapse in the middle of the night. And a lot of times our patients will call us at that moment. But that moment, and then the other moment that I absolutely loved was, we've talked in this conversation about the stigma that comes with talking about suicidality, the stigma that comes with talking about depression. There's a moment on a rooftop where she's claiming her life, and she's asking each of the people who mean the most to her to stay together, to, two of them to possibly move together. And instead of, sheltering those people from her struggles or not revealing anything, she's saying, I want to claim my life in this way. And I just thought that was such a wonderful kind of arc from, not telling anyone anything, that kind of thing. So anyway, going to our final questions. Jill, Dr. Emanuele, September is Suicide Prevention Month. In closing out our live here, is there any message you'd like to share that you're hoping gets to people during this month in particular that we haven't talked about here today?
Yeah, I think, Nadine, you've said so many of the things that I would answer this question with. So I'm not sure I have a ton more to say, but there's two main points that I think are important. First of all, and I think we hinted at this, but I think it's important to say it directly, is that the journey of healing And therapy is a bumpy one. And you depicted this in the film really well. It's move forward, step back, move forward, step back. And it's infuriating and annoying sometimes for people. And you have to hang in there. So part of the spirit of Suicide Prevention Month is the idea of making a commitment to life, which is what you were just talking about, Dave, with that scene. Is I'm actually committing to living. And so we want people to be able to know that that is a choice and you can make it. But I think that we should probably close with the spirit of the month also being that we recognize your suffering and we validate it, and there is help out there. So if you ask someone for help and you don't feel like you've gotten it, please don't give up. Keep asking, because there are people out there that can listen the way you need them to and can give you that support. And you may, just like therapy, it may be just that you ask a person who's not capable of supporting you in that moment, but there's more. So just keep asking. It's out there. That's what I would say.
And on the note, oh yeah,
Well, one thing I want to say to that too is that
yeah,
it might not, sorry, I know, but it might not be family in the time too. It's like my parents or my family weren't equipped, but sometimes it was outside people. It's like, if you don't feel safe with your family, or if it doesn't, there's not just one choice. There's not one size fits all. It's the other thing too. I feel like a lot of people are like, you need to talk to your parents. And I'm like, no, I think I need to find someone else to talk
and that's
to.
What that's what I'll
too,
often say to someone is, who is the person that you would go to? Not which parent will you go to? And it's like, and often enough, it's not a parent, because there's a lot of shame for people in acknowledging these things to their parents. And so, or a lot of feelings about that, or anger, there's a lot of things that go into that. So, yeah.
On the note of there always being more, and this is the final question for you, Nadine, there's a semicolon in the title of the movie, and you've also started a foundation stemming from it, Continue On. Can you tell us a little bit about that and perhaps the symbolism of the semicolon?
Well, the semicolon, it was obviously not created by me, but it became like a very worldwide universal sign of mental health struggles, suicidal ideation, suicide survivors. I mean, me and the army of almost everyone I know have semicolon tattoos. And it's like, and I already have numerous, and I keep being like, oh, I want another one, so it's like, it's become this symbol where we almost all can recognize each other in it. So from the second I wrote the script, I always had a semicolon as the I in the script. And a lot more people knew what that meant than didn't. And that was kind of the coolest thing about it. And that's why I really pushed it from the beginning of inception all the way through Lionsgate putting this film out, that the I as a semicolon was really important to me. So I knew my audience, my people will find it. They'll understand that what this film is about. And then, that's why I also chose the title Continue. And then my nonprofit Continue On is because it's really a call to action. It's what I'm asking people to do, and there are twists and turns in this film that really kind of prove, or, are my thesis, which is, you have no idea how your life could change tomorrow. You don't know who you could meet. You don't know how many paths your path will alter and change just by not being here. And the only way to know what will unfold, who will come into your life, what it will all look like, is to be here tomorrow, is to continue. And Continue On really came about because I was going through a really hard time. And this was maybe a year ago. So again, this is the thing I want to touch on, is I didn't make this film about something I went through as 23. I made this film about something I'll go through and experience the rest of my life. I am not cured. But I continuously work to be healthy, and I have bad times that still arise, and I have the support system. I have the tools in my toolbox. I know to reach out now. I know who to reach out to, so I just want to say that too, is a lot of people will come up to me and be like, what did you do? How did you find the cure? And I'm like, oh, I love you. I'm not cured. We're just as in this together, And so I was going through a really hard time of struggle, and I just felt like, okay, I should probably go see a psychiatrist again. I haven't seen one in a few years, to see about maybe if I should look at medication right now during this time, And I have so many relationships in the mental health world, which is really exciting. So I got a bunch of references from friends, and every single person that I called did not take insurance, even though I have 3 different forms of insurance, and they did not, and their rates were around $675 for every 30 minutes. They required for your first session to be around $1,000. And this is LA. Maybe it's not. I saw your eyes, Jill. I'm like, I pray to God this is only LA, like that it isn't really nationwide or worldwide, because it scared me. And I said to the person on the phone, like after my 3rd phone call of still not being able to find someone I could afford, and literally about to break into tears. And I was like, if I, as a 35-year-old woman, cannot afford this, how on earth will any of our youth, will any of the people who need these services be able to afford it? And the person just kind of like didn't have an answer for me. And they're like, I don't know what to say to that. It's just our rates. And so that is when I was like, I cannot freaking stand by any longer and do nothing about this. Like I'm close with a lot of youth. I try and do mentorships. I try and help where I can. I also at the time was going through helping someone transition who was transgender and going through. And so like, there was all these things where I'm like, how will they afford it? How will anyone? So I was like, all right, I'm doing this. I'm saving my money and I'm going to start my own nonprofit. And so really it took me years to save the money to be able to create my nonprofit. And basically the entire initiative behind it is that I'm going to create a subsidy that will pay for 100% of the mental health services that our youth need in a time of struggle. Because I believe that we all deserve access to the help we need, especially during crisis or times of struggle. And so that's my dream. And that's the mission I'm on, is to try and be able to provide these services and match people with healthcare providers. And so I'm also building a network of providers who will work within the nonprofit to, help us achieve this. So
I was going to say,
calling you
we at the
like,
Child
"Can we
Institute could not agree more with this
Yes.
concluding note of us continuing on and doing all of this work and trying to help people get access to the care they need in a crisis where people don't have access to the care they need. So, folks, in closing, thank you, Dr. Emanuele, and thank you, Nadine, so much for being with us in this conversation today. For anyone who is looking to watch the film that we have described in such detail, but also left much mystery about, Nadine's film Continue is now available on demand on a range of streaming services. Again, as I said at the top of the panel, for help and resources around these topics, please visit childmind.org. And if you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide, call or text 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, or visit your nearest emergency room. Or, as Nadine just said, reach out to anyone, and start talking about what you're going through. Thank you so much to everyone for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.